people, because here today to say a few words about our online prayer program and services, the founding leader of our prayer chaplain program, a woman we all know and love, Barbara Richards.
Thanks, Shirley. And I'd actually just make a little tweak there, say co-founder, because it's a privilege to be here the day that Shirley's a platform host, because she and I held hands as we have walked with this program over its 12 years now. Well, I'm really pleased to have a chance to say a few words this morning. As I was looking over the gallery photos, my heart filled with gratitude with all of the people that I personally and the prayer chaplains have had a chance to pray with over the years. It's just such a privilege and an honor to be praying with you. And I wanted to say a couple of things today for people who perhaps haven't yet used the prayer online after our Sunday services. You know, it was one of the big changes when the building closed, that we weren't able to just spontaneously after the service go up and pray. We had a lot that needed to be worked out behind the scenes, and I'm glad to say it's been now available for quite a few months that you can have a prayer with a prayer chaplain in a private prayer room. And of course, every prayer is held in complete confidentiality. And I want to say a couple of things about how it works and how you can access it if you haven't yet tried it. And sometimes people ask us, well, what would I bring to prayer? And there's three broad categories. One is a concern that's on your own heart. It could be a healing challenge that you're facing. It could be a relationship issue. It could be a challenge in your career or in your finances, that they are all areas we love to pray with people on. Another area can be a concern for a loved one. And you know, in this time of the global pandemic and all of the disruption it's created, many of us are deeply concerned for loved ones, whether it's people who are touched by the virus, people who've experienced a job loss, or people whose lives have been disrupted. This is something we can bring to prayer. And then the third area, and this might be a little different than some people are used to with prayer, we also invite you to bring your vision. We love to pray with people about their heart's desires, their creative projects, their emerging callings. We love to bring it to Spirit for blessing and guidance and creative ideas. We welcome you to bring any and all of these to prayer. And sometimes people say, well, why would I pray? You know, why? And it was great that Nathan did that song today because it so summed it up. And when you pray with a prayer chaplain, what we know is true is that where two or more are gathered together in the name of love, there I am as well, that there is something greater, the Christ consciousness, Spirit, that comes with us. And when we bring either our issues or our concerns for others or our heart's desires to pray, it's like this act of knowing that we are not alone. Whatever we are facing, we're not alone. That God is our partner. God is our source. And through the act of praying, we're opening ourselves as a channel for Spirit to work through. That in prayer, there's a shift from that human consciousness of worry and fear, erroneous perception, to our divinity, to that place of oneness, to accessing all the power of Spirit and saying yes for it to flow through us. And I find when I pray that it isn't just the 2 or 3 minute prayer that I have, that there's something that occurs in it that stays with me, that I can keep my consciousness focused on, whether it's a phrase the prayer chaplain said, or whether it's something Spirit said to me that I leave altered for the week or the month or for my life, whatever it is I bring. So it's easy to pray with a prayer chaplain. I get great instructions at the end. And someone recently who tried it for the first time said to me, wow, this is easier than I thought. So sometimes the instructions sound a bit complicated. The process is very simple. We've worked out most of the bugs. There's still a few hiccups once in a while, but it's generally a very simple process. And after the prayer, if you want to rejoin the fellowship, the group, after the breakout rooms, that's possible as well. So on behalf of the prayer chaplain, one last thing I wanted to say. I wanted to also thank Randy, Cynthia, Garrett, and Sean for all of the thought and effort that's gone into making this possible. It's easy now. It took a lot to work out. So we just deeply thank the partnership of all of you in making this possible. On behalf of the prayer chaplains, we hope to be praying with you soon.
Thank you so much, Barb. That's given us a lot to think about, and it really is a simple procedure, folks, and it's, you know, prayer changes us so dramatically, and I certainly invite all of you to take this opportunity after the service today to pray with one of the prayer chaplains. And now let's take a nice deep breath or two and realize that we're going to center ourselves so we can say we can listen to Nathan in singing the new Aramaic version of the Lord's Prayer. Nathan, thank you so much.
And I hope that those of you who are with us this morning will not just listen, but will sing along if you know it. Holy Spirit, creator and life of all, create a space inside us and fill it with your presence. Let oneness now prevail. Your one desire flows through us as energy fills all forms. Give us this day our physical and spiritual nourishment. Untangle the knots of error that bind us as we also release others. Don't let appearances make us forgetful of the source, but free us to act from our highest nature. From your presence comes the glorious harmony of life. May these words be fertile ground from which our future grows.
Thank you, Nathan. And now to lead us in our morning meditation is Reverend Cynthia Briggs.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Shirley. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Barb. How lovely, and how lovely to be with all of you. Barb, you set this up beautifully. I mean, just with prayer in general, which is such a foundational piece of my life, of Will's and my life. And today we just want to honor and recognize Yom Kippur, which is the Jewish holiday of High Holy Days. And this is High Holy Week and time of the Jewish tradition. And Yom Kippur is one of the most important holidays and times in the Jewish tradition and for Jewish people. Yom Kippur is about reflection and about prayer and atonement and repentance, if you will. And so as we move into our meditation time, we'll just take a little time to reflect in that same way. This evening is the beginning of Yom Kippur at sunset and goes through tomorrow evening at sunset. And it's a time where Jewish people across the world are deepening into their prayer, deepening into self-reflection, deepening into looking at forgiveness and being connected at another level, at a soul level, at a really heart level with the divine. And so as we move into our meditation time, I'm going to invite you into that space a little more deeply into your own heart connection with God. So I invite you to close your eyes or have a soft gaze away from your device. Just take some deep breath in. So just taking that deep breath in, staying in your heart. And as my dear friend, Rabbi Ted Falcon says, this time of Yom Kippur gives us an opportunity to begin with appreciation. Appreciation of what is in our way. Appreciation for what stops us, what limits us. It gives us a time to discover when we look at this, when we reflect on this and discover what stops or limits us. It's often our own self-judgments, our own forgetting, our own unconsciousness. And so in this time of reflection, we are giving the opportunity to begin recognizing those elements, those aspects, and begin to forgive ourselves. It's a time to reflect on forgiveness, a time to reflect on letting go of self-negativity and come back into a place of deeper connection. Come back into a place of connection. This time of prayer is a very important time to do that kind of inventory of self and say, how have I been in the last period? Maybe a little less loving or a little less compassionate to myself and to others. It's important to look at that, not to dwell there, but to be truthful about it. And know sometimes in our life we miss the mark. And it gives us the opportunity in this human condition to come into a higher place of consciousness so that we can find new opportunities and new possibilities of aligning more closely with love, aligning more closely with God. And when we do that, we connect with each other. We connect with ourselves more deeply. So how have you been perhaps missing the mark over the past period, maybe the past several months during this time of COVID, which has challenged us all? And then looking at what areas maybe you can step it up, bring it up a little bit more and Find ways in your daily life to love more, to be more generous, to be more compassionate. And the first place to start is with ourselves. We have to love ourselves to be able to love anyone else. So in this time of reflection, this time of Yom Kippur, this time of prayer, gives us a time to slow down, a time to be with ourself and be with our God. It gives us possibilities if we listen. It opens us to other levels of our consciousness. Listen and discover who you are. Who God is. Awaken to the possibilities within yourself. As you reflect in your prayer time of what to let go of. And what to step into more fully. To be in more alignment with what you speak, what you believe, what you trust. Peace be with you.
I want to speak this morning about divine ecstasy and human destiny. In trying times like these, when we seem engulfed in tremendous vulnerability and uncertainty, it's natural to wonder, what is the destiny of the human soul? Why are we here? Where are we headed? What's it all about? Rumi gives a beautiful answer, as he so often does in one of his poems. Another morning, pour the divine wine. A life without God's love is nothing but slow death. Oh, brothers and sisters, take a sip from that golden cup. Its nectar will turn this world into paradise. Drink, drink, and laugh at the clown that others call despair. We are not here for our own sake, but for God's sake. We are here to reclaim the sacred magic of life, which is but a reflection of the love and glory of God. This is our true purpose, to re-sacralize life and to uplift one another into this remembrance and reverence every day. Otherwise, what's it all about? What's it for? Our minds tend to see life as a pendulum swinging back and forth between joy and pain, between light and dark, happiness and sadness, hoping for positive, enriching experiences and shunning mundane and repetitive experiences. Our minds perceive a mix of drudgery and divinity and reject the former and chase after the latter. But our hearts know there is only divinity. What we call drudgery is but divinity in disguise. We are deceived by outer appearances, taking them to be real. And this is the source of our misery. And this is why Rumi enjoins us to laugh at that clown that others call despair. What are the ways of drudgery in your life that you can convert into an exercise of perceiving divinity and then laugh at your own despair? This laugh is not a taking lightly. It's a re-perceiving the deeper truth of our existence. If we see if we see misery in everything, then everything becomes miserable. If we see God in everything, then everything becomes God. Even washing the dishes, as that wonderful teaching from Thich Nhat Hanh. As you may recall, if you've heard this before, when Thich Nhat Hanh was still a novice monk, washing the dishes was not a pleasant task. Sometimes only 2 novices had to do all the cooking and wash all the dishes for well over 100 monks. This made the young Thich Nhat Hanh monk none too happy. But over the years, Thich Nhat Hanh transformed his entire experience of washing the dishes. And he came to a whole new realization, which he describes as follows. When I wash the dishes, I take my time with each dish, being fully aware of the dish, the water, the soap, each movement of my hands. I know that if I hurry in order to be able to finish so I can sit down sooner and eat dessert or enjoy a cup of tea, that time of washing dishes will be unpleasant and not worth living. That would be a pity, for each minute, each second of life is a miracle. The dishes themselves and the fact that I am here washing them are miracles. If I'm incapable of washing dishes joyfully, if I want to finish them quickly, sorry, I just read that. But then I will be incapable of enjoying my dessert and my tea when I finally have them. With the fork in my hand, I will be thinking about what to do next. And the texture and flavor of the dessert, together with the pleasure of eating it, will be lost. I will be constantly dragged into the future and miss out on life altogether and never be able to live in the present moment. And he concludes with this very important teaching. Each thought, each action in the sunlight of awareness becomes sacred. In this light, no boundary exists between the sacred and the profane. And he concludes, I must confess it takes me a bit longer to do the dishes, but I live happily in every moment. Washing the dishes is at the same time a means and an end. We do the dishes not only in order to have clean dishes, we also do the dishes just to do the dishes, to live fully in each moment while washing them, and to be truly in touch with life. Some years ago, I was on a phone conversation with Thomas Keating, who was one of our spiritual mentors, and he was lamenting the fact that they were going to cancel their annual interspiritual retreat, which they had had for 30 some years. Well, at that time, probably about 26, 27 years. Cynthia and I had also both been invited and attended, and we knew the beautiful value of these gatherings of religious leaders and mentors from all the different religions at his monastery. But they had a crisis. Their cook had died. And the cook had some helpers who normally came with him, and they were all in mourning. So they literally had no one to do the service work. And he had scrambled, he said, and he'd found a couple of people who would cook in a pinch, but they had no cleanup staff, they had no assistants, and they had no help. And so they were going to cancel the retreat. And I listened to this, and it just seemed so sad and just like, well, what can be done? And so Cynthia and I were on our way, traveling across the continent somewhere. We were getting on a plane and we realized we could do the dishes. I mean, come on, they're going to cancel this whole retreat just because of that? So right as we were crossing that threshold and entering the plane, I called up Thomas and said, well, what if Cynthia and I come and do the cleanup? Would you be able to not have to cancel? And so then that became what happened. They didn't cancel the retreat. Cynthia and I flew out to Snowmass Monastery and we did the kitchen cleanup. Now there's that little part of me, that little niggling eye that thought, well, you know, if we're going all the way there, then I'd also like to be part of the thing, you know. We had been there before, we'd attended before, but we hadn't been invited that year because it was a time for others to participate. And I was sort of hoping, well, maybe we'll get to be part of it, you know. When we got there, it was a lot of work and there was no time. We had all the kitchen prep for all the meals. And then afterwards, all these dishes, big pile of dishes for 30 people. And I had the big hose there and the sprayer, you know, doing all the dishes. So sure enough, there was no time. It really was a real job and it needed a full focus. But what a joy it was. Cynthia and I had such a wonderful week. We were washing the dishes for this wonderful group of inner spiritual religious leaders. And of course, they heaped us with praise during the meals because we were doing this service for them. But we were being fed by it. It wasn't some great thing we were doing. All we were doing was washing the dishes. And yet it was such a joy to be in service in that way. And during the meals, the fruits of their meetings were given to us. And so it was in the end a win-win. We participated anyway, even though we didn't attend any of the sessions. So that's a little example of the dishwashing and the spiritual teaching come together in a beautiful episode. But I want to tell another story, because this laughing at the clown called despair does not mean that we don't take despair seriously, that we need to be present with it. And we need to also not allow it to drag us down. Even in despair, we can be bathed with divinity while despairing. I want to tell a story that speaks to this. Many years ago, when I was working on my PhD at the University of Arizona, and at that time, I used to fly gliders. You know, gliders are those airplanes with no engine. And so when you fly a glider, you hook it up to a tow plane and there's a rope between the tow plane and the glider. And then the tow plane takes off and pulls the glider up into the air with it. And then when they get high enough, the glider releases the rope and is able to fly around based on lift and thermal currents. And so I was out there, I was a student, solo student, so I'd learned how to fly them and I was practicing. So I was setting up my glider, I was doing my pre-flight check and everything. We had to line up behind one after the other. And so I was next in line. The guy ahead of me was just taking off and they took off and I was focused on getting my pre-flight check ready and getting everything set. And then I heard some noise and some shouting and there was a bit of an argument. And I sort of looked over there, what was going on? And they had aborted the takeoff. And there was some kind of argument between the pilot and the wing runner. The wing runner, when the glider is on the ground, one of the wings kind of gently leans to the side and touches the ground. And so the wing runner has to pick that wing up and hold it level and then run with the glider. And then by the time the wing runner is at running speed, there's enough airspeed over the wings for the pilot to control the wings and it doesn't fall anymore. So that's the job of the wing runner. And something had gone wrong. And so they had to do it over again. And I was just vaguely aware of this, but I was very focused on my glider, getting it ready. And then the next thing that I heard while I was just done and the tow plane was coming back around to land. And then I heard this shouting and this truck came out and there was this man in it who was distraught. And he said, it crashed, the glider crashed. And I just looked at him and he said, jump in. So I jumped into this truck with him and we drove out to the end of the runway and beyond the runway out just into the desert, off-road, looking. And he said, it happened over here somewhere. And we drove and suddenly we found, not too far, a couple 100 yards, we found a deep gash in the desert sand, which was clearly had been done by a wing striking the ground. And so we stopped the truck and we started looking around, and about 100 feet away, we found the crash site. And of course, we were the first on the scene. And we went up to it, and let's just say it was not a pretty scene. The pilot was still breathing, but he was not in one piece. And it was shocking. And then right there, in the midst of that horrifying scene, at one level, it was a horrifying scene, but I suddenly saw the pilot's soul shimmering invisibly above his body. It was undeniable. And it was something that my grandfather had prepared me for some months earlier. And I think in a previous talk, I've spoken about the moment of my grandfather's passing. And when he passed, before he passed, he had had a stroke and he was gasping for breath in the death rattle. And it was all that I could muster to even be in the room. It was so difficult, so painful, and I just didn't want to see it. And I didn't want to have to witness it. But at the moment of his passing, it was so profound. And I literally saw something that I didn't expect. I expected him to die like I'd seen in the movies where the head just dumps to the side and that's it. And he becomes a stiff on the bed kind of thing. And instead, I saw this light. I saw this opening. And I felt his presence, this shimmering divinity that was in the room, and I could see it. I could perceive it. It was a seeing, but it was not these eyes that were seeing. It was another eye that was seeing, but it was unmistakable. And in that instant, my whole understanding of death was transformed. What a gift from my grandfather. And I realized that he had not died. And when no one was looking, I waved to him. I waved to the air in the room, not to his body, because I could feel his presence. And I knew he was there. And that suddenly, I wasn't thinking about that when I arrived on this crash scene at all, but suddenly I saw this same shimmering. I saw this pilot's soul. Infinitely beautiful and precious. And it basically transported me into this sacred kind of bubble of divinity. Now, next to me was the man who I'd driven with in the truck. He was 30 years my senior, and he was a friend of the pilot. And understandably, he was totally distraught and beside himself. And so here we had this situation, and there we were when two or more are gathered, as Barb was saying earlier. I am there too. The Christ presence was there. I felt it. I didn't expect to feel it. It was just given to me. And in that moment, it was given to me to be sort of service to him because he was so distraught. And so I began ministering to him. Now, I didn't even think of myself at all as a minister. I'm a graduate student in mathematical physics, but there was a call, and somehow I was placed in that moment of service, and this man was coming to pieces. And so I held his hand and we walked around the scene, and I was telling him what I saw. And I don't even remember what I said because it was not me speaking. It was a very private, interior, and personal moment. And yes, it was tragic. There was no doubt it was tragic. And yet there was this sacredness and this shimmering divinity, and I witnessed it and I spoke to it. And we came across part of his body that was severed from the rest of it. And I saw it with two forms. I saw the horror and just the stark horror of it. But I also saw that same shimmering divinity, and I spoke to that with this man, and that his friend was utterly safe and unharmed in his essence. And we walked around like that for the next 4 or 5 minutes. And then a chopper came, the police chopper came and arrived on the scene, and then they sealed it off and moved us out of the way. And so this was just a simple case in which, in the depths of despair, in the most tragic of circumstances, still there is the divinity, the living divinity of God was present. And that Christ was with us, the two of us in that moment. And in some way, we shared that sacred moment together. And he calmed down. And he said, I am the one who has to go and tell his wife. And we cried together. But it wasn't, I don't know how to describe it. We were somehow held in this bubble. And then later we went back, of course, once the police came and everything, and then we went back, and the pilot of the tow plane was devastated. Everyone was so upset, understandably. And what had happened was also so tragic, because the pilot had forgotten to hook up his controls. So, a glider is an airplane with no motor. So sometimes you have to land gliders out in the dirt in a field somewhere. And so you actually disassemble it. You take the wings off, and then you put it in a long, narrow trailer. Maybe you've seen them, or maybe you know them. Maybe some of you have flown gliders, but you put the wings on this trailer and you drive it back to the airport. And then you reassemble the thing. And of course, you have to hook up the flippers on the wings called ailerons. This pilot had forgotten to hook up the controls. That was his first mistake. And maybe he didn't do it. Maybe someone else had put the plane together and that wasn't his fault. But his next mistake was critical. There is a pre-flight takeoff check, which you do as a pilot every single time. For gliders, it's A, B, C, 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 D. Altimeter, belts, controls, that's the one he missed. Cable, which is the thing that hooks you to the tow plane. Canopy, which is the thing that closes. And D is for the direction of the wind. And you never fail to do it. And it's drilled into you as a student pilot. All pilots, you have a checklist and you follow it, because aviation is very unforgiving of sloppiness or lack of discipline. You have to do it well or not at all. And this man evidently did not do, because what you do is you actually move the controls and you look out on the wing and you see that flipper moving. And had he done that, he would have seen that he had no control. So the equivalent would be like getting in a car, stepping on the gas at 60 miles an hour, and the car goes straight down the road. And suddenly when you're moving at 60, 70 miles an hour, the car starts to slowly veer off towards the edge of the road, and you turn to try to, and you realize your wheel is not connected to the wheels. Your steering wheel is not connected to your driving wheels. And that's what happened. But the second tragedy here is that, in a sense, God gave him another chance. Because on that first takeoff, he thought that the wing runner had dropped the wing on him. And so he aborted the takeoff, pulled the release, aborted the takeoff, got out of the plane, and responded with anger and frustration and projection on this other man. This other man who had done it many times and was incensed, who said, I did it like I always do it. And the pilot insisted that the wing runner had dumped the wing on him. It never occurred to either one of them to see if anything else was wrong. The tow pilot had come back, they'd all talked about it, and they said, let's do it again. And the pilot insisted, I want another wing runner. So they called another wing runner out there. All of this was happening while I was preparing my glider for takeoff. So I wasn't really paying attention. I was aware of it, and then they took off again. Well, this time he didn't need the ailerons until he was well in the air. The glider followed the tow plane. But then when the tow plane turned and the glider couldn't follow, and the way that gliders are, the wing area is much bigger than the tow plane. So the glider has to follow the tow plane. Otherwise it'll drag the tow plane out of the sky. And that's what started to happen. The glider couldn't follow. It started to go one way and it started to drag the tow plane tail backwards. And the tow pilot was in horror. He was going to have to dump the glider, but then the glider dumped, released the rope, and cartwheeled in. And by the time we finished, by the time the police arrived, the pilot had died, which was only a few minutes. And we were at peace. There was some kind of peace that this man and I were sharing with this soul of his friend. And then the police arrived, and then it all became sort of chaotic, and that whole sense of sacredness was not shattered, but interrupted by all of the sirens and the busyness and the medical crews and the whatever else. So I tell this story because there were some deep lessons there, obviously. First of all, in that moment of need, God showed up and sustained me through that experience and brought something through me. It wasn't something I did. This man needed some support. It came through me, but not from me. I didn't have the capacity or knowledge to do it. I was somehow lifted into something larger. My grandfather had opened that door for me. And somehow I was then called into service and was carried into being able to perceive this tragic reality from a sacred perception. And ultimately, human destiny is to be living in this sacred communion all the time, even in the most difficult situations. And this is not to say that I don't get balled up in frustration at times. Of course I do. But I reflected deeply, of course, on this experience when I got home that day and told my girlfriend at the time. Then I collapsed into tears. And then I had all this emotional release because of the intensity of it and the trauma of it. And all of that came forward, which it needed to. But somehow in that moment, I was lifted to another perception. And what I knew was that even though this man paid for that mistake with his life, I mean, he made the first mistake. And then when they stopped the first takeoff and he got out, he had an opportunity, but he collapsed into anger and projection, blamed it on someone who was innocent. That person felt judged and stormed off. To none of them did it occur to check everything, make sure the plane is okay. Not even to the tow pilot, none of them. And it's not their fault. They were all focused on this drama. But it shows you how that drama, anger, projection can collapse our awareness. And they all got back into their vehicles and repeated the same mistake. And he paid with his life for that. And yet, even then, I saw that his divinity was present, that his decimated body did not even scratch the purity of his divine being and his divine essence. And that although from our perspective it was a tragedy and his whole life was gone now, from the larger cosmic perspective, he was now released, going back, and probably would incarnate again, and probably will take that lesson very seriously into his next series of incarnations. So at every moment we can return to this practice, because every moment of life is sacred. So I want to invite you into an exercise for this week that comes from Charles Fillmore, which is really very simple and very beautiful. The way Charles puts it, he says, as a step in your development, declare with John the Baptist, he must increase as I must decrease. You recall that moment at the baptism where John the Baptist baptized Jesus and realized, my time is over. Jesus must increase, I must decrease. And as Charles says, in using this statement, know that it is the personal human who decreases, and it is the consciousness of the indwelling Christ that increases. And as we practice this, Christ must increase, I must decrease. What happens is that very I that is decreased gets replaced by the I that is Christ. And that will take place naturally if we but attend to it and give ourselves to it. Because if we see misery, we become miserable. And if we see divinity, we become divine. So as we practice seeing God in everything, the tiniest little thing, and rejoice in that, we reclaim that divine ecstasy in the midst of a human drama. So I want to close with a poem from Hafez, because this kind of speaks to that exquisite mystery of this human soul, the unbelievable beauty. And this is a poem that describes it from Hafez in a certain way. Do you know how beautiful you are? I think not, my dear. For as you speak of God, I see great parades with wildly colorful bands streaming from your mind and heart, carrying wonderful and secret messages to every corner of this world. I see saints bowing in the mountains, hundreds of miles away, bowing to the wonder of sounds that break into light from your most common words. Speak to me of your mother, your cousins, your friends. Tell me of squirrels and birds that you know. Awaken your legion of nightingales. Let them soar wild and free in the sky. And begin to sing to God. Let us all begin to sing to God. Do you know how beautiful you are? I think not, my dear. Yet Hafez could set you upon a stage and worship you forever. You are so beautiful. So let us practice this week. Christ must increase, I must decrease, and begin to sing to God if we have not already. Then begin to sing more often and more joyously. For we are here to love God, to sing to God, to dance in and as God. Divine ecstasy is our human destiny, to be dancing and singing to, in, and as God in every moment. Amen.